Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show built to transform a mountain of information into the essential knowledge you need to succeed.
Today we're tackling something I think a lot of our listeners will recognize. It's that feeling of hitting a plateau.
The C1, C2 conversational plateau specifically. It's that moment when you realize, that just being fluent isn't quite enough anymore.
Right. You can get by, you can have conversations, but something's missing.
Yeah, exactly. If you ever find yourself in, say, a fast-paced professional meeting or maybe a really complex academic discussion, and you're holding back because you just can't quite grab the specific word or the right structure to express yourself with real precision, well, this deep dive is definitely for you.
It is. It's probably the most challenging transition for any language learner. You have the vocabulary, you understand the grammar, but when the complexity ramps up or the pace just accelerates,
You hit a wall.
you hit a wall. You go from communicating correctly to, well, struggling to communicate compellingly. And our mission today is really to give you the operational strategy for that shift.
And this isn't a vocabulary quiz, right?
Not at all. This is an exploration of the art of advanced communication. We're talking about structure, delivery, tact, and, the strategic thinking that really sets a master speaker apart from just a good one.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. We've synthesized a really comprehensive body of instructional strategies, and they're aimed squarely at bridging that gap.
Yeah, we're going to cover everything.
From how you organize a really difficult argument all the way to those subtle, nonverbal cues that, help build your credibility.
The goal is to give you those critical nuggets.
The sophisticated tactics, the things you need to move beyond sounding just functional.
And start sounding authoritative, natural, and I think most importantly, genuinely confident. We're really talking about moving from language processing toward language mastery.
All right, so where do we start? What's the foundation?
Well, we have to start with the fundamental shift in what you're actually communicating.
Okay.
At that intermediate level, B1, B2, the focus is mostly on accuracy, getting the tenses right, the syntax correct.
Just not making mistakes.
Exactly. But at the advanced C1, C2 level, the focus shifts completely. It shifts to impact. Which brings us right to our first tactical shift, moving beyond basic statements by using the power of storytelling and specificity.
I like that. So it's not just about what you say, but how you frame it.
Precisely. The sources we looked at are crystal clear on this. Advanced communication is fundamentally about making a human connection.
Right, because if your C1 conversation sounds like you're just reading a textbook summary,
You've completely missed the point. People will just tune out. You have to make the abstract relatable. And the best way, the absolute best way to do that is to share a personal experience or a concrete anecdote.
okay, so let's make that really clear. Let's illustrate that contrast.
Sure.
If someone asks you about the value of organization,
Yeah.
the, let's say, intermediate response might be something like, time management is important because it helps me finish tasks,
Correct. Grammatically fine.
but completely forgettable.
Totally forgettable. An advanced speaker, on the other hand, transforms that simple statement into a mini narrative. They draw you in.
So what would they say instead?
They might say something like, time management became absolutely critical for me last quarter. I had this huge, overwhelming project at work. A 15-part deliverable. And honestly, I initially felt paralyzed.
I'm already hooked. I've been there.
Right. And they'd continue, but I took an hour, I broke it all down into 5 key tasks, focused entirely on just the first 3, and I actually ended up finishing a day ahead of schedule. That experience just cemented for me that organization isn't a luxury, it's the difference between burnout and success.
Wow. That specific story, it takes this abstract concept, time management, and just anchors it in a really visceral, relatable moment. It's so much more engaging and memorable.
And that approach is vital, absolutely vital, when you're discussing concepts that are inherently dense or, abstract.
So, if you're discussing the pace of societal change, just saying there is a lot of stress in today's world because of technology, that kind of falls flat.
It's a statement of fact, but it has no power. You need to provide imagery. You have to relate that complex, abstract pressure to something tangible. And metaphors are your best friend here.
So what's the recommendation from the material? How do you paint that picture?
Instead of just stating the fact, you describe the feeling. You could say today's environment feels like we're juggling more responsibilities than ever. It's like trying to balance multiple spinning plates simultaneously, just desperately hoping none of them crash.
The spinning plates. That imagery does all the heavy lifting for you.
It really does. It conveys that feeling of precarious, fast-paced overwhelm far better than any string of generic adjectives ever could. It's a sign of true fluency because you're using the language creatively and strategically to evoke a shared understanding.
The listener doesn't just hear the words, they feel the tension of the situation. Okay, so once we've mastered the content, the what, we have to look at the language itself, which I guess brings us to vocabulary upgrades.
Yes, but with a key distinction. It's not just for complexity, but for naturalness and confidence.
Right. This is a huge hallmark of C1, C2 proficiency. You're moving away from those default words, the ones you learned early on.
And you're substituting them with richer, more expressive options. For instance, the sources strongly suggest upgrading I'm very happy to I'm thrilled, or maybe I'm elated.
Or instead of the common but kind of weak phrase, it's hard, you could say.
It's challenging, or it requires significant effort. These aren't just synonyms, they carry more specificity. They project more confidence.
But the vocabulary shift isn't just about using bigger, fancier words, is it? It's also about using language to signal a certain kind of intellectual maturity.
And this is where we introduce one of the most critical advanced tactics. I mean, if you take one thing away about vocabulary, this should be it. It's qualifiers, often called hedging.
The art of avoiding definitive black and white statements.
You've got it. In any high-level professional or academic discussion, definitive statements like, this is the best policy, or everyone must agree,
Can make you sound rigid, or honestly a bit naive.
absolutely, especially when you're dealing with complex, multifaceted topics. Hedging is the linguistic tool that shows you acknowledge that complexity, that uncertainty, and that other perspectives exist. It's fundamentally a sign of intellectual humility and professionalism.
So instead of staking a claim on absolute certainty, you're building in nuance. Give us some practical examples of how to do this gracefully.
Okay, so instead of the definitive, this is the best solution, you hedge it. You say, this might be one of the best solutions we can explore right now, but we must acknowledge there are other possibilities and, potential drawbacks.
That one qualification might be, it's transformative. It allows you to present a strong argument while still leaving room for refinement or disagreement.
Exactly. It opens a door for collaboration instead of shutting it.
And are there different layers of hedging? I mean, saying something might be true feels very different from saying it's likely to be true.
Oh, absolutely. They serve different strategic purposes, and the advanced speaker chooses their words here very intentionally.
So walk me through that.
If you're discussing, say, data analysis where you actually have statistical support, you'd use phrases that convey high probability but not absolute certainty. Something like, there is a strong possibility this could happen based on current trends.
Or, it seems likely that this will be the outcome.
Precisely. But if you're discussing a hypothesis or a more philosophical theory, you use softer language. It could be argued that, or I tend to lean toward the idea that.
So choosing the right qualifier demonstrates precision. You're matching your language to the actual degree of certainty that the topic allows for.
You are, and that is a very advanced skill.
That is fantastic. Okay, so once we have strong, nuanced, and appropriately hedged content, we have to make sure the listener can actually follow our sophisticated train of thought. This brings us to structuring complex topics for clarity.
Yes. Structure is the scaffolding of any advanced argument. It's everything. When you get asked a complex question, say, about global supply chain disruptions, you can't just dive into the latest bottleneck you read about.
You'll lose your audience immediately.
You will. You have to organize your thoughts before you speak to make sure your response is clear, concise, and direct. The sources we reviewed all emphasize this need to break down massive issues into smaller, digestible points.
The material used the example of discussing climate change.
Yeah.
If you immediately launch into complex policy mandates, you're going to lose people.
You are. So the structural advice is to first acknowledge the seriousness of the issue, then frame the discussion as something manageable, and finally, structure your exploration logically.
Give me the play-by-play.
Okay. You start by saying something like, climate change is undoubtedly a serious and, an existential issue, but it is fundamentally addressable through targeted action.
Okay, so you've set the stage. It's serious, but solvable.
Exactly. Then you provide the roadmap. To understand the solutions, we must first look at the key drivers, the causes, before we can move on to mitigation strategies. That little roadmap, presented briefly right at the outset, prepares the listener's brain. It tells them how to receive the complex information you're about to give them.
And structuring also involves how you elaborate on your points, right?
Yeah.
How do we make sure our arguments are rich and well-rounded?
By strategically using comparisons and contrasts. Advanced conversation is rarely just a monologue. It involves synthesizing multiple viewpoints.
So if you're talking about different work styles, don't just state your own preference.
Right. Contrast them. Talk about those who prefer working entirely in teams versus those who need that deep, uninterrupted solo work to be productive. Then you add your personal synthesis.
Which would sound like?
While I really respect the efficiency of solo focus, I personally find that teamwork helps me stay motivated and accountable, especially when we're all pursuing a common, ambitious goal.
That structure, presenting two sides and then arguing for a preferred synthesis, it shows you've considered the issue from multiple angles, which is a key cognitive marker of that C1, C2 ability.
Exactly right. Mastering this foundational section means you are equipping yourself not just with correct words, but with the methods of sophisticated thought, organized for maximum clarity and intellectual impact.
So we've established how to build a complex, nuanced idea. Now we have to focus on how those ideas get exchanged in the real world, in the fluid, sometimes chaotic environment of an actual conversation. And that begins with seamless transitions and linking ideas.
Transitions they're like the oil that keeps the conversational engine running smoothly. Without them, your contributions can sound like a series of disjointed points, just bullet points spoken out loud.
And they signal to the listener what you're doing. You're changing the subject or shifting your argument.
Or building a cause and effect relationship. Even simple phrases like, speaking of the project we just mentioned, or, that reminds me of an experience I had. They're crucial for making those topic shifts feel natural and not jarring.
And when you're building a complex, persuasive argument, you need those crucial linking words, the ones that establish clear cause and effect. They're the real workhorses of logical organization.
Absolutely. We rely on connectors that delineate logical progression. Words like because, as a result, consequently, therefore, and moreover.
But you're saying there's a C1 distinction here. It's not just about using them, but how.
Yes. The advanced speaker understands the varying formality and weight of these different connectors. They're not all interchangeable.
Okay, explain that. What's the difference in weight between, say, because and therefore?
Well, because is very common, very flexible. You can use it in almost any context. But therefore or consequently carry more weight. They feel more formal, and they're typically reserved for academic or professional settings where you're drawing a strong logical conclusion from the evidence you've presented.
Okay, can you give us the example from the source material? The one about technology.
Sure. It lays it out perfectly. Because of the rapid pace of technological development, many jobs are being automated. As a result, people are being forced to quickly adapt to new work environments, and therefore, governments must rethink educational priorities.
You can just hear the logical progression. It's perfectly organized.
Yeah.
But, in real life, conversations stray. They go off on tangents. What happens then?
And that's where the tact of the advanced speaker really comes into play. You have to master the subtle art of steering the conversation back on track.
Gently.
You have to be firm enough to regain focus, but polite enough that you don't cause offense. It's a real balancing act.
So how do you manage that gracefully? If a colleague starts talking about last night's game when you're supposed to be discussing quarterly budgets,
You could interject with something like, that's a fascinating point about the sports analogy. But if we could, let's circle back to our original discussion about the sustainability metrics.
I like that. Circle back. It's polite but clear.
Or you could say, I really want to hear more about that later, but just quickly, I want to finish my thought on the cost analysis. This shows respect for their point while reinforcing the critical path of the discussion.
Okay, moving on from flow, we arrive at what is often the overlooked half of advanced communication, and that is mastering active listening and clarification.
Yes. It's not just about dominating the microphone, it's about engaging deeply with what other people are saying.
It's proof that you're actually processing and respecting their input.
Exactly. And the primary technique here is repeating or reflecting back their ideas, but in your own words.
So if my manager argues that working from home increases productivity because of reduced commute stress, I would reply with
something like, so if I'm tracking correctly, you believe the primary benefit of remote work is the reduction of that logistical overhead, which in turn frees up cognitive energy for task focus.
That one response is doing so much work. It confirms my understanding. It shows my manager I was truly listening.
And critically, it buys you a few precious seconds to formulate your own nuanced response. It's a brilliant and simple technique,
And in more technical or complex settings,
Hmm.
you have to be the one to paraphrase jargon or specialized terms,
Yeah.
right, to make sure everyone is on the same page.
You absolutely have to. If someone uses an acronym you're not sure everyone knows, or a niche concept, you should paraphrase it.
So, for example, if someone starts talking about the Pareto principle in a business meeting, I might jump in and say, so if I understand correctly, we're applying the 80-20 rule here, meaning 80% of our results are being driven by 20% of our efforts. Is that right?
Yes, that act of clarifying and confirming is essential for group coherence. And never, ever hesitate to ask for clarification, even if you feel like you're the only one who doesn't know the term.
That's a big fear for a lot of learners.
I know, but it's far more professional to show you're dedicated to clarity than it is to just nod along, pretending to understand. A simple, I'm not sure I fully grasp the distinction you're drawing between monetary policy and fiscal policy. Could you elaborate on that part a bit more? That's a sign of engagement, not of ignorance.
Okay, now for the truly delicate part of advanced conversation.
Oh.
Handling disagreement and challenging views with tact. C1, C2 discussions inherently involve differing opinions, especially when you're dealing with high-stakes topics like policy or ethics or strategy.
And the goal is not to win the argument. This is so important. The goal is to advance the quality of the discussion. You have to contribute your counter-idea without resorting to immediate dismissal of theirs.
The source material highlighted several key phrases for polite disagreement. What are some of them?
Well, instead of just blurting out you're wrong, you use acknowledging phrases. Something like, I see what you mean about the cost-saving benefits, but I tend to think differently when we factor in the long-term staff turnover implications.
Or, that's an incredibly interesting perspective, especially regarding the history, but I have a slightly different take on how that plays out in the modern environment.
The structure is what's key there. You acknowledge, you transition with a but or however, and then you propose your alternative.
And part of that tact involves acknowledging the validity of the other person's viewpoint, even when you're about to present a strong counterargument.
Yes, that is the definition of intellectual fairness. You might say, I completely see your point about convenience. It does make things much smoother for the consumer. But we also need to seriously consider the ethical implications of how mass data collection affects our collective privacy.
You validate their point before you insert your crucial counterpoint.
It shows you're listening and you respect them, which makes them much more likely to listen to and respect your point in return.
And what about when you're faced with a truly challenging or maybe even a potentially hostile argument?
Maintaining your composure is everything. It's a huge demonstration of maturity. A non-defensive response like, that's an insightful perspective that many people share, but let me explain why I've arrived at a different conclusion based on the evidence I've reviewed.
That shows emotional intelligence and intellectual confidence all at once.
It does. It de-escalates the situation and reframes it as a discussion of evidence, not a personal attack.
Okay, finally in this section on engagement, let's explore the strategic use of questions. I feel like questions are often underutilized as sort of managerial tools in a conversation.
They are so critical for managing the interaction and for guiding the depth of a discussion. For example, if you've just made a complex point, you should actively ask for feedback to ensure alignment.
Like saying, what are your initial thoughts on this three-pronged approach?
Or, how does that sound to you in light of our previous strategy? This forces interaction, it creates a dialogue, and it confirms comprehension.
And to encourage those elaborate C1, C2 level discussions, we absolutely have to move away from questions that just invite a one-word answer.
Closed questions, right. We need open-ended questions that demand synthesis and elaboration from the other person instead of asking, did you like the new film? Which just prompts a yes or a no.
You should ask,
what did you think about the director's use of non-linear narrative structure, and how do you feel that affected the character development?
that immediately elevates the conversation from just casual commentary to deep analysis.
It invites a much more interesting response.
And the most powerful strategic question is often the rhetorical one.
Oh, yes. Rhetorical questions are fantastic. They're asked not for an answer, but to emphasize a point, or to instill a little bit of doubt in a counter-argument, or just to spark reflection in your listener.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. If you're discussing policy and action on an important issue, you might ask, given the clear scientific consensus we're seeing on this, how much longer can we realistically afford to ignore the downstream effects of this environmental deterioration?
Right. You're not actually asking for a number.
No. You're focusing their attention and gently drawing the listener toward your own conclusion. It's a very persuasive technique.
Okay, we've covered the content and the interaction flow. Now let's focus entirely on how the message is physically delivered, because even the most sophisticated idea can be lost with poor delivery. Let's start with intonation and pronunciation for meaning.
Right. Correct pronunciation is obviously the baseline for C1, C2. You have to be understood. But sophisticated delivery uses stress and rhythm to convey nuance and emotion.
So if you pronounce every single word with the exact same emphasis, you're going to sound
Mechanical, robotic. Regardless of how great your vocabulary is, you have to learn to emphasize the important words to signal to your listener where the critical information actually lies.
Let's use a contrast again. If I just say flatly, I went to the concert last night and enjoyed it. It's flat.
But if you say, I really enjoyed the concert last night, you're using stress to signal both the intensity of your feeling on the word, really, and the focus of your experience, the concert. This natural rhythm is a huge marker of fluency.
It shows you're not just reciting words from memory.
You're conveying meaning. And that stress can completely change the intended message of a sentence.
How so?
Well, think about the phrase, I told him to go. The stress on him implies you told that specific person, maybe contrasting with someone else you didn't tell.
Yeah.
But if you stress the verb, I told him to go, it emphasizes the forceful nature of the command. It suggests maybe he was reluctant and you had to insist. Mastering this really requires practicing, mimicking native speakers' speech patterns until it becomes unconscious.
All right, moving on. Let's tackle one of the greatest challenges for non-native speakers: the impact of pauses and timing. I think we often feel that if we pause, we sound hesitant or like we're struggling for words.
And that anxiety leads so many advanced learners to rush, which ironically just makes their speech less clear and harder to follow.
Whereas the strategic pause is actually a sign of confidence.
And thoughtfulness. Pauses give your listener time to process complex information. It makes your message more impactful. They act as a kind of natural punctuation in your speech.
So where should we be deploying these strategic pauses?
A great place is right after you deliver the most difficult or emotionally resonant part of your message. For instance, if you're discussing a challenge, you might say, the most difficult part of learning English, especially at this advanced stage, is staying motivated when the gains are incremental.
And then you pause.
And then you pause for just a beat. That pause lets the listener internalize that core statement before you continue to elaborate on the why.
And just as importantly, we need to normalize taking a moment to think when we're asked a complex question.
Please do not rush into a messy, unstructured response. Taking 3, 4, 5 seconds to formulate a structured answer is a sign of professionalism, not weakness.
And you can use transition phrases to buy yourself that time.
Absolutely. Say something like, that's a profound question. Let me just organize my thoughts for a moment. Or, I haven't considered that angle before. Give me one moment to process. This signals to the listener that they should anticipate a high-quality, thoughtful response, rather than interpreting your silence as hesitation or confusion.
Next up, let's talk about tone, formality, and cultural sensitivity. The words we choose are only one part of the equation.
A small part, sometimes. Tone is the emotional vehicle for your words. The exact same phrase, I can't believe this is happening, takes on entirely different meanings depending on your delivery.
Right. Said quickly with a high pitch and enthusiasm, it means you're excited or pleasantly surprised.
But if you say it slowly, with a lower pitch and tension in your voice, it signifies frustration or serious shock.
And advanced speakers need to be masters of register adjusting their language style based on the context.
It's non-negotiable at this level. You use highly formal, nuanced language in a job interview or a presentation to the board. Something like, we should perhaps initiate a dialogue on the subject.
But with a friend, you'd just say,
let's hash out what we think about that later. You use relaxed, contracted, idiomatic speech. Knowing when to deploy that polite professional language is essential. Using, may I suggest we explore this option further instead of just, we need to do this.
And the higher you go in complexity and formality, the more critical cultural awareness becomes.
In a global business environment, recognizing cultural differences is everything. Different cultures interpret directness, humor, even the use of certain metaphors or phrases completely differently.
So what's seen as appropriate, efficient directness in a North American context might be viewed as
overly aggressive in some Asian cultures, where more indirect hedging language is often preferred. An advanced speaker manages these expectations to avoid causing unintentional offense or misunderstanding.
Finally, let's wrap up delivery with nonverbal communication and clarity. When we're face-to-face or even on video, these nonverbal cues carry enormous weight.
They establish trust. They reinforce your message. Your body language and your gestures, they have to match the gravity of the topic you're discussing.
So if you're talking about a light, positive topic, you'd use a naturally light tone, a smile, open gestures.
Of course. But if you shift to a serious financial or ethical discussion, your posture should become more formal, your tone more serious, and your eye contact more consistent. This matching ensures your credibility. It shows you understand the weight of your own words.
And critically, nonverbal delivery supports clarity.
It does. Body language helps, but the ultimate clarity comes from being direct and avoiding rambling or vague language. We all have to fight that tendency to over-explain or wander off topic because we're nervous.
So the advanced speaker just states the idea clearly.
They get to the point. It is critical that we address this regulatory concern immediately because it poses a significant financial risk over the next 3 quarters. Clear, direct communication guarantees your ideas are understood, remembered, and respected.
Now we are moving into the highest level of C1, C2 mastery. We're applying critical thinking to discussions. This is about moving beyond simply having an opinion and toward strategically constructing and supporting a compelling argument. And it all starts with supporting your arguments with evidence and examples.
Right, because in any serious C1, C2 setting, an opinion without some kind of backing is, well, functionally worthless. Your statements have to be convincing and authoritative, and that requires data or concrete cited examples.
This is where you have to leverage your general knowledge and synthesize it into the current dialogue.
Exactly.
But how do we smoothly integrate that data without sounding like we're just reading from a research paper?
You use introductory phrases that signal the source of the authority. So instead of just saying, I think carbon emissions are high, you integrate data by saying, according to recent peer-reviewed studies published last quarter, carbon emissions from industrial sources have increased by 20% in the past decade, which significantly accelerates our timeline for action.
That citation immediately validates your position. It's not just your opinion anymore.
It's a fact-based argument. And when you're dealing with concepts that aren't easily quantifiable with hard numbers like ethics or abstract theory, you have to rely on real-life contextualized examples.
So if you're discussing the ethics of surveillance,
you relate it to a famous legal case or a known tech company controversy. If you're discussing ethics in business, you can argue that ethical companies build stronger, more sustainable customer relationships in the long run, as demonstrated by the incredible brand loyalty enjoyed by Patagonia, which consistently prioritizes social responsibility over short-term gains.
that concrete example makes the abstract concept practical and persuasive.
It does. It brings it to life.
Next, strategic speakers focus on encouraging critical thinking and thinking about future outcomes. This shifts the discussion from just describing the present to evaluating potential futures.
The best speakers do this constantly. They challenge the immediate premise of the conversation and introduce counter-perspectives to deepen the exploration.
So you might interrupt a linear argument by asking,
That assumes a stable economy, but what if we looked at this issue from the angle of a sudden, catastrophic market contraction? How would that change our projected outcomes? It forces everyone to challenge their fundamental assumptions.
and framing responses in terms of potential outcomes is a massive indicator of strategic long-term thinking.
It really is. It shows you're considering the ripple effects of any decision. For instance, you don't just advocate for renewable energy. You acknowledge the entire trajectory.
So you'd say something like,
If we decide to focus aggressively on renewable energy, the immediate benefit is a drastic reduction in our carbon footprint. But we must also prepare for the transitional costs and recognize that it might take 3 to 5 years before we see the full economic benefit and grid stability.
you're balancing the positive outcome with the realistic challenges. It's a much more credible argument.
And this kind of strategic thinking is linguistically realized through the mastery of conditional sentences. These are absolutely essential for discussing hypothetical or imaginary scenarios with any depth.
Conditional sentences, especially the second and third types, are vital for policy discussions and philosophical debates.
They are. If you're discussing a hypothetical action you might take, you use the second conditional. If I were in charge of this department, I would prioritize staff training over infrastructure upgrades. It's an imaginary situation that allows you to present a clear, alternative plan.
And the third conditional lets us reflect on past hypothetical errors or triumphs.
Precisely. It allows for advanced reflection and for assigning causality to past events. For instance, if we had invested in that technology 5 years ago, we wouldn't be facing these production bottlenecks today.
Using that structure demonstrates an ability to analyze complex chains of events and their implications. It adds a ton of depth to your
A
commentary.
huge amount.
Okay, moving on. An advanced discussion also involves offering and receiving constructive feedback effectively. This has to move beyond just simple agreement or disagreement.
Feedback at this level is a collaborative tool. It's for productive exchange. When you receive input, you don't just get defensive and protect your position.
You ask clarifying questions about the suggestion.
Yes. Can you explain more about the financial modeling behind your recommendation? Or how specifically would you suggest we implement that idea on our current timeline? This transforms what could be criticism into a collaborative, problem-solving session.
And the truly advanced speaker will actually solicit feedback on their own clarity.
Yeah.
That shows real intellectual humility.
Yes, you might pause and ask the group. I recognize this is a complex financial point. Do you think I've made my point clearly, or should I rephrase the section on market volatility?
Or even just, how could I explain that better to make sure we're all aligned?
That willingness to be corrected or clarified is incredibly disarming. It builds a lot of trust within a team.
All right, our last strategic point addresses an inevitable reality of fast-paced communication. Handling interruptions smoothly.
Oh, this is a big one. Interruptions, especially in high-stakes meetings or academic debates, can completely derail your argument and shake your confidence if you aren't prepared for them.
The key is to practice techniques to stay calm.
Stay calm, maintain your conversational thread, and gracefully regain control of the floor.
So we need some specific, non-aggressive phrases for managing these moments.
We do. If someone jumps in, you can use phrases that acknowledge their input while also reinforcing your need to finish your thought. You could try. That's a highly relevant point, but just allow me one more sentence to conclude this thought.
I like that. It's polite but firm.
Or, I appreciate that, and I'll address your comment on the budget shortly, but let me just finish explaining the underlying principle first. These phrases assert your control and show that you value both your contribution and theirs. You're not dismissing them, you're just sequencing the conversation.
We've covered the entire structural and strategic landscape. Now let's make it actionable. Let's focus on the techniques and the psychological shifts that are required to actually integrate all of these skills. And we can start with a really relatable story. Maria's journey.
Maria's experience, I think, perfectly captures the advanced learner's dilemma. She had excelled in grammar tests, she could read complex literature, she had a vast vocabulary. But when she had to participate in fast-paced debates, whether it was for work or just a social setting like discussing the nuanced plot of a dense novel with friends, she froze. She just couldn't keep up.
And why was that?
Because she was trying to translate every single word she heard in real time.
That real-time translation, that inner monologue trying to convert meaning, it's the biggest brake pedal on C1, C2 fluency. She felt overwhelmed because her internal processor was just completely overloaded.
It was. So the key shift for her was that she was encouraged to stop listening for every single word and instead start listening for main ideas, intonation patterns, and the rhythm of the speech.
So she was moving from word-by-word comprehension to overall pattern recognition.
Exactly. It was a massive cognitive shift that allowed her brain to finally bypass that slow, cumbersome translation stage and focus directly on meaning delivery.
And the practical technique that helped her bridge that gap was the consistent use of shadowing exercises.
Shadowing is revolutionary for rhythm and flow. Maria started repeating short passages from high-level, natural-speed media podcasts, TED Talks, immediately after the speaker said them. She was mimicking not just the words, but the exact intonation and pace.
And it felt weird at first, I imagine.
She said she found it really awkward and unnatural at first, but within a few weeks, it improved her mouth muscles, her ability to handle rapid speech, and her overall understanding of that native rhythm. It rewired her brain.
And the breakthrough, the moment she really hit that C2 achievement marker, was revolutionary for her.
It was the moment she realized she had stopped translating. She was forming her thoughts directly in English, and that led to this incredible spike in her confidence.
So she went from fearing her weekly team meetings
to confidently leading them. She could jump into spontaneous social discussions, like dissecting the complex motivations of a character in her book club without any hesitation, because the language was finally accessible and immediate for her.
So the ultimate takeaway from Maria's story is that fluency isn't about eliminating all your errors.
Not at all. It's about building the confidence to take risks and to achieve that critical shift from translation to direct thought and spontaneous strategic communication.
That brings us directly to some other specific practice methods for C1, C2 mastery. Beyond shadowing, What other targeted approaches can build this kind of sophistication?
Well, first, let's stick with shadowing for a second. The content you choose matters. C1, C2 learners should be using content that really challenges their current rhythm and speed.
So, not simple narrative fiction.
Ideally, no. Professional or academic discourse. You want to listen to experts speaking naturally and rapidly, and practice those phrases that use reduction, where native speakers blend sounds together to truly master that natural flow.
Okay, next up, language immersion, which doesn't necessarily mean you have to pack up and move to an English-speaking country.
No, immersion means surrounding yourself completely with English media wherever you are, and the key is to align that media with your specific non-language interests.
So if you're passionate about, say, historical documentaries or complex strategy video games,
Consume that content exclusively in English. This leverages your intrinsic motivation. It makes the difficult vocabulary acquisition feel like a necessary tool for enjoyment, not like you're doing homework.
and to practice the tactical structure and persuasive arguments we discussed earlier, the materials recommend debating and role-playing.
Debating is perhaps the single most advanced conversational exercise there is. It forces you to form persuasive arguments quickly, to defend your position, to handle interruptions, and to use those complex conditional and linking structures all under pressure.
And role-playing.
Role-playing simulating a tense negotiation or a performance review or an investor pitch improves your quick response capability in all sorts of diverse high-stakes scenarios. It prepares you for the real thing.
And the final technique, which anyone can start doing right now, is the internal monologue.
This is a mental bridge to true fluency. Commit to thinking in English throughout your day. When you're making a shopping list, form the thoughts in English. When you're processing a decision, debate the pros and cons in your head in English.
And what does that do?
This constant low-stakes rehearsal helps your mind become accustomed to forming complex thoughts directly in the language, which dramatically reduces your processing time during an actual spoken interaction.
Finally, we have to address the essential psychological component in all of this: building confidence and maintaining a growth mindset.
Advanced conversation is often high pressure. You have to learn to manage your emotions and respond calmly, even when you're under pressure, or discussing topics where your knowledge is a little less certain. Managing that anxiety is crucial for clear articulation.
And we absolutely must embrace making mistakes.
You have to. Errors at the C1, C2 level are not signs of failure. They're signs that you are pushing the boundaries of your linguistic capabilities.
Right. You're attempting complex structures, idiomatic phrases, and nuanced vocabulary that you wouldn't have even touched at the intermediate level.
Exactly. So you should embrace those errors as evidence that you are stretching and growing.
And to avoid plateauing, we need to constantly challenge ourselves.
When you start to feel comfortable in your familiar topics, you have to set new challenges. Force yourself to engage with highly abstract or dense subjects, philosophy, advanced economics, complex political history. This deliberately pushes your vocabulary and comprehension to new, higher heights.
And to fuel that motivation, we need to be able to track our progress, to see that it's working.
A great strategy for this is self-recording. Record yourself summarizing a recent news article or delivering an argument once a month. Then listen back to those older recordings.
Well, will you notice?
You'll be able to monitor tangible improvements in your fluency, in the complexity of your sentence structures, and in your overall confidence over time. It makes the progress visible and real.
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We've moved from the necessity of storytelling and advanced vocabulary like hedging, through the essential social intelligence of tactful disagreement and strategic questioning, and finally into the specific delivery mechanisms, the pauses, the tone, the structure that really define C1, C2 authority.
And the core lesson, as we saw with Maria's success, remains the same. Advanced fluency isn't solely about accumulating more grammar rules. It's about cultivating the confidence, the precision, and the cognitive agility to synthesize complex thoughts and connect with others clearly.
Consistency, strategic practice, and that psychological commitment to think directly in English are the non-negotiables for true mastery.
They absolutely are.
So here is our final provocative thought for you, the advanced learner. If mastering advanced conversation involves the ability to synthesize, evaluate, and support complex opinions with evidence, what specific highly technical or philosophical topic, which you currently avoid because it just feels too difficult, will you challenge yourself to research, find supporting evidence for, and discuss out loud this week?
That's a great challenge.
Identify that challenge, prepare your arguments, and then just jump in. You're ready to move from fluency to mastery.
Until the next deep dive, keep practicing your strategic pauses, stay curious, and keep engaging with the language. We look forward to hearing about your continued journey.